organizing this very interesting workshop, and thanks to Pavel and Joe, who unfortunately can't be here because he has to teach his own class. I've been very stimulated by the discussion so far, and I'm in the fortunate position. I get the last word. I'm also very, I'm very pleased that Pavel in his talk kind of took care of the historical, conceptual overview of roots so that I don't have to do that myself. I don't think I would have been prepared for that, and you did such a lovely job. Okay, right. Variation and creativity with radically afeatural roots. So today I'm going to argue contra Pavel's view. If I may just name it like that as a proxy, I know it's not completely yours, and in the same way what I'm going to say isn't completely my brand new, fresh, original idea, but I'm going to argue contra the sort of nanosyntax view of roots, that there really are syntactic roots, and that they're radically afeatural. That is, that they don't have any categorical information, that they don't have any semantic information, they don't even have any phonological information until after syntax. So just to sort of remind us where we came from last time, we've already heard from Pavel about this sort of traditional morphological view of roots, and we can dispense with that. That's not what we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about this idea, this theoretical concept of a root in syntax. So syntactic roots, I think you called them. So I'm going to reserve the term root to mean syntactic root, and then we can argue about what they're like. I'm not going to address the whole sort of descriptive morphological term for root. I'm going to keep this as a technical term. So the basic question, what is a syntactic root? To be pre-theoretical about it, we could say, what's a lexical morpheme? Joe told us last time some reasons to think that there's really a difference between grammatical morphemes, sometimes called abstract morphemes, and lexical morphemes. So, speaking of lexical morphemes, what's the locus of their form? Which, standardly that's some phonological form, but I say form neutrally because I don't want us to forget signed languages, which also have form. The same issue should arise there, although I won't speak about that at all. What's the locus of the form and the idiosyncratic meaning in a lexical morpheme? That is, the non-compositional, non-grammatical, truth-conditional meaning of lexical morphemes. Where does that information live? And I think that everybody knows the traditional view. It's just common sense. And all the muggles know it too. This is my favorite disparaging term for people that don't know anything about linguistics, which is most of humanity, right? But all of humanity and linguists also know that there are these things called words, or linguists know that there are these things called morphemes. And morphemes are an object that has a category, like it's a noun or a verb or an adjective, and they also have some kind of form. They have a pronunciation or a sign, and they have some meaning. That's what a morpheme is. That's the structuralist classical definition that we tell all the students in morphology class, at least in our morphology class. A morpheme is the smallest unit of sound and meaning. So all these things cohere in one object, and then everybody knows that what you do with words and what you do with morphemes is you put them together in order to make phrases and sentences. It's a very intuitive view. I'm going to argue against that view. And again, let me emphasize that this is not like some fresh original idea of Jeff Parrott. It's just an idea I'm very enamored of, and so I'd like to argue for it. The view that contrary to the intuitive view of morphemes as objects with sound and meaning and category, that they have none of those things. And what you do is build a structure in syntax, and then you find out what the pronunciation and the meaning is. So this is a view I'm going to argue for. And the basic form of the argument is going to be something like this. I'm going to try to show you that yes, morphemes depend on syntactically local morphemes for their form and meaning. And that view is already not universally, but fairly widely accepted, and there's a considerable overlap in the three talks, at least on this point, that there is some kind of late insertion. So we already, many of us think that grammatical morphemes have this property, but then I'm going to, of course, extend the argument and try to show that indeed lexical morphemes, that is roots, have the same property, not only on the PF side in terms of their form, but also on the LF side in terms of their meaning, which means they're late inserted too. And then toward the end of the talk, I'm going to show that, well, I don't know, show might be too strong. I'm going to suggest that if you have this model, then it gives you a really nice way to show the mechanisms for linguistic creativity at the word level. That is, to show how humorous word coinage works on this model. It doesn't have to be kind of lexicalist black box. So that's the basic shape of what I'm going to say today. I'm going to try really hard to not go over time so that there's time for discussion. But obviously, I invite you to break in and at any time if you have questions and stuff. And I guess if you want to argue with me, that would be awesome. But maybe that could wait till the end for the discussion period. If it works out that way, of course, I won't be really strict about it. Okay, I have to tease Pavel a little bit because we had this discussion at the Egg. Our friend and colleague Andrew Nevins was at the Egg, and we decided, or maybe it was decided for us to have a sort of workshop event where we would discuss nanosyntax and distributed morphology, and we had some conversations around that, and Pavel used this funny expression about turtles all the way down. I don't know if you've ever heard this before. It's sort of I don't know if it's apocryphal actually. It's been reproduced in several places, including by John Ross and I think Bertrand Russell and Stephen Hawking and other scientists. But the basic story is that there's a scientist giving a public talk, and and she says, well, the Earth is a spherical, and it's orbiting the sun, and it's part of the solar system, and we live on the Earth, and a little old man in the audience says, no, that's totally wrong. It's really obvious that the Earth is resting on the back of a turtle. And the scientist says, oh, she says, that's nice, but I mean, come on, what's that turtle standing on? And he says, well, it's standing on another turtle. And she says, right, okay, but what's that turtle standing on? He says, you think you're so clever. It's turtles all the way down. Turtles all the way down. So I just found this funny cartoon. This is a truly historic moment. Commander, are you ready? He's poised to challenge an accepted cosmology like no one else. He's just trying to bring truth to the masses, and he jumps off and comes down and says, "Armadillo!" I knew it wasn't turtles all the way down. I just have to tease you a little bit because this is sort of a funny way of describing the view that there aren't any roots, that the trees are unrooted, right? So that lexical morphemes are just the same as the rest of the tree. They're composed of grammatical features. Each feature is a head, and they're composed by merge into a hierarchical structure. And what makes one root like turtle different from another, what makes one lexical morpheme like turtle different from another lexical morpheme like armadillo is just that at some point down in that feature structure they have some different features. And I hope that I don't misrepresent you. Terribly.
There might be some which are like the same. Anyway, we can take it.
Right. We talked about that a little, for example, about the concept of names. That names, for example, might have the same feature structure, but the distinguishing part is in the lexical entry. Which is post-syntactic. So this is something that these two frameworks have in common. But not all lexical morphemes are like names, and at some point there has to be something that differentiates turtle from an armadillo, right? And there's going to be many, many more examples like that, which I will give. Okay. And Joe Emonds' view I took to be a kind of variant of the traditional lexicalist view. That is, that there are these complexes of phonological features or semantic features. They're together in one object, and that object is inserted prior to the application of merge and structure building, which is what I take to be the sort of more or less traditional lexicalist view. So I'm going to present a view that's situated in a minimalist theory of distributed morphology. And this is a bunch of stuff that you probably already know. The basic idea is that what we have in human language is some structure building operation, that's what we call merge, that builds hierarchical phrase structures, and then at some point the structures that are built are sent off to the interfaces, and the interfaces interface with language external components. Still mind internal, still organism internal, but not internal to the language faculty itself. So that's LF, called logical form. That's the part that interfaces with the systems of thought, concepts, and so on. And PF, which some linguist who I shamefully forgot, but gave it the wonderful name of perceptual form. Usually the P stands for phonetic or phonological form, but again, I like perceptual form better. We should always remember that language is modality independent, right? So you build a structure and then you interpret that structure at the level of form and the level of meaning. And so then the next question is, of course, what are the primitives? What are the things that are actually put together into these structures that then get interpreted? And again, the traditional view, which again I'll use Joe as the representative of that, is that up here, before you do any syntax, you have something called the lexicon, and that's the place where you construct these objects that are composed of semantics and phonology, which then are assembled by syntax and interpreted. Okay, and distributed morphology is a theoretical framework that's been developing for, well, how many years has it been? 25 years or more. And distributed morphology, again, sort of questions some of the received wisdom. In distributed morphology, word formation is syntactic. It's not anything other than syntax. So the word isn't exactly a theoretical object in this theory. The way you make words is more or less the way that you make phrases. You combine primitives in merge, using merge in syntax. And distributed morphology is a non-lexicalist theory. There's no lexicon. And this term lexicon and lexicalist gets used so frequently and in so many different ways that it's important to clarify exactly what we mean when we say there's no lexicon. What we do not mean is that there's no listed stuff, because there simply must be. We all know that there have to be lists of idiosyncratic, semantic, and formal information. Somewhere in the grammar there has to be a list. So what no lexicon means here is that there's no pre-syntactic structure building component. There's nothing in the model of grammar prior to syntax that builds objects. So that's a very minimalist view, right? The only structure building is merge, and merge is a syntactic operation. So there's no black box called the lexicon where by some mysterious, not the same as syntax process, we put together things called words. Okay, that's out in this theory. Okay, the second, yes please.
Could you just briefly address the issue of feature bundles?
Yes, I will. I mean, this is a very big point of difference between nanosyntax and distributed morphology. So I will definitely mention that. Okay, there's also no lexicon in a second sense, and that is that there's no place in the grammar. There's no place, oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's good, because I'm going to draw on this one. There's no place in the grammar where phonological, semantic, and categorical features all live together. There's no place in the grammar where they're all together. So that's a second sense in which there's no lexicon. So if these things don't live together, then how do they get together? They get together through syntax. And in particular, phonological exponents, so the form, the pronunciation, the phonology, whatever you like, is inserted late. It's determined after syntax. That's called late insertion. So this is going to be what I mean when I say late insertion. We talked with Joe a little bit after beer and found out that he meant something different by late insertion. What I mean by late insertion is phonological exponents is determined post-syntactically. Do I have a slide with feature bundles? So Pavel asked me about feature bundles. And that's, of course, a crucial question. In nanosyntax, there are no feature bundles. They take this merge as structure building very seriously. They say there is no way to put features together into a terminal, into a single object, other than merge. So that means every feature is a head, and the combination of features is hierarchical. And distributed morphology does not assume this. In fact, distributed morphology leaves open sort of, I would say, two possibilities. One possibility is that there are, here it is in my slide. There are feature bundles prior to syntax. And it also leaves open the possibility, and this is what Joe meant by late insertion in our beer discussion, that you can have dissociated, so-called dissociated morphemes. Or what Harley and colleagues call node sprouting, that after you do syntax you can actually add a feature or add a node to the tree. I'm not going to address this part directly since I'm going to worry about roots. But it's a very pertinent question. I mean, we should have a workshop like this, for sure, and fight this out. My own opinion, which is not going to be based on any argument, but my opinion about this is that if there are pre-syntactic feature bundles, that this is part of acquisition process. That what you do during acquisition process is figure out what the active grammatical features of your language are, and if they are bundled in some way. But this is yes, you're shaking your head. Of course, this is just a bit of speculation.
Like saying, I don't have any lexical entries, but that's the role of my acquisition to figure out lexical entries that are just like it's my goal to figure out what each bundle there are. So.
Yes, I mean, that is certainly something that's worth discussing. And I mean, one would like to bring empirical arguments to bear on this. But it doesn't affect what I'm going to say today, since I'm going to focus on roots and not grammatical morphemes. And I'm going to claim that roots don't have features, so there's not going to be any question of feature bundles for roots. So I'll leave that alone, but I hope some of you will come out for a beer after the talk, and then we can hash that out. Okay, so here's the Y model. This is what I wrote on the board, and the idea here is that the primitives, or the objects that are going to be merged into these hierarchical structures by syntax, they consist of two types of objects. One, feature bundles or features or heads. These are abstract, grammatical, functional morphemes, whatever you call them. Okay. And then there are roots. So you take from this list of primitives, you take heads, roots, and functional heads, and you merge them together in syntax. That's how you get a tree. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that. Then at some point there's something called spell out. This is again something that people have debated, if there's only one spell out, if there's multiple spell out, if there's multiple spell out, where do you spell out? The sort of, I don't know, contested but still plurality consensus, I think, is that there are these phases, so that there are particular subdomains that get spelled out. Once you get spelled out, what happens? Notice that's the Y. You split up. So you build a tree, and then you send that tree to LF, and you send it to PF. And after that, there's no more talking between LF and PF, right? I think there's this sort of attractive idea that if we communicated via telepathy if we just read each other's minds, then there would be no PF. PF is the side for externalization. And really, the job of syntax is to build LFs, right? This is a sort of theoretical concept that I like, that I'm attracted to. So that means funny stuff can happen on the way to PF, right? Because this is where you have to externalize. You have to take some abstract, hierarchical, nonlinear mental object, and you somehow have to put it into a physical signal that's going to go out into the world, right? So what happens here? Basically, you have to prepare yourself for pronunciation. That's what happens on this branch, the PF branch. Okay. And things can happen here, and this is part of the research program in distributed morphology, and again, people argue about this. So further operations can modify the trees to prepare them for pronunciation. I'm not really going to talk about that. This is another point of difference between distributed morphology and nanosyntax. And some minimalists don't like this either. Some minimalists don't like this either. They think it's not very minimalist to postulate a bunch of extra operations here. To which I respond, it's extra minimalist because they're not in the narrow syntax. They're exactly where you might expect them to be, that is, on the messy externalization side, sort of forced on you by the real world. Okay, so here's the idea. Here's the list of formatives that are going to be constructed in syntax. Consists of roots and abstract features. So where do you find the meaning and the pronunciation? The exponents are listed here. They're listed in what we call the vocabulary. So this is a list of exponents for terminals. How do you pronounce the abstract terminals? Remember, they don't have any phonology up here. On the LF side, you have another list called the encyclopedia. This is the list of interpretations of roots. And of course, I'm going to give examples of all this. Okay, so I'm just giving you the schematic, and then I get into some examples to show you what I mean. So again, remember, up here, the roots have no phonology and no category and no semantics. And after spell out, the phonology can't see the meaning, and vice versa. So the meaning and the phonology never live in the same place together. So here's the first list, the list of formatives. So roots, as I've said, and I will continue to argue for this, they have no category, no phonology, no semantics, no other grammatical features. Also no other grammatical features. Radically afeatural, okay? So roots don't have gender features, they don't have countability features, they don't have any grammatical features. They only have one thing. They have one property. I guess you could call it a feature. That's an index. Some index. Why do they need an index? Because eventually you have to look them up on the list. You need to know whether you're dealing with an armadillo or a turtle. You're going to look it up on the list. That's what the index does. I represent the index here following Heidi Harley as a numerical index. Partially out of convenience, also because it doesn't trouble me since the natural numbers can be derived by merge. That is n plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, merge 1, merge 1, merge 1, you get the natural number. So the fact that this is a numerical index doesn't bother me. It doesn't have to be a numerical index, as long as it's some unique way of looking up the root on the encyclopedia list and the vocabulary list. Oh yeah, here's my bundling slide. This is in the slide actually. Okay, so the second type of formative are the feature bundles. These are grammatical and categorical features. They're UG features. I assume that these features are provided by a universal grammar, and again, I do assume that part of the acquisition process is to figure out which features you're working with in your language, and if they're bundled. So we can call these the formatives, list 1. Prior to syntax. So you go into syntax and you merge these things together. So suppose, for example, that you have a root, let's just call it root number 713. You have some grammatical feature, like let's say D plus definite. And you have a categorical feature. I wrote this as little n. It doesn't exactly matter what you call it, but it's the grammatical head that will result in a noun. So first I merge the root with the categorizing head. And now I have a noun, and then I would merge the D, and now I have a DP, syntactic object. I'm going to just assume as standard that agree takes place in the syntax also, so feature matching and valuation under C command. I don't have anything else to say about that. There is more to say about that, obviously, just like there's a bundling question outstanding, which I don't try to address here. There's an agreement question outstanding I don't try to address here either. The question of whether agree is all and only in the syntax or whether it's partially or totally post-syntactic. There are people that argue for both sides of that. Okay, I showed this one to my students. And just to give us a quick reminder, I hope that you don't need reminding, but let me just say that syntax is hierarchical, language is hierarchical, it's not linear, right? And this fact is so evident, and it's even a source of humor through structural ambiguity. So where you go in, sorry, I have to go feed my baby turtles. Oh, how cute can I watch? Feeds human infant with the turtles. And of course, the whole joke is a structural ambiguity, right? Whether baby turtles is a constituent or not. Whether baby turtles is the phrase. And we know that about syntax, and we tell the students about, seeing an elephant in pajamas and all that. The same is true at the level of what we would call words. The exact same ambiguity holds. So you're laughing, so you get it. I laughed when I read this headline, even though it's actually really sad, because of course you can understand the intended meaning here. Which is that some sociopath thinks it's a great idea to murder these birds that are endangered species, and then you get the reading bald eagle serial killer, right? You get killer of eagles. That's a syntactic relation. We call this incorporation compounding. And you can see, and everybody immediately knows, that this has a syntax, namely that eagle, bald eagle, is the syntactic direct object of killer. Okay, and then something else happens and you get this complex word, but the funny reading is the one with the different syntax. Even though it's the same words in the same linear order, you get another syntactic possibility, namely attributive, right? A serial killer who is a bald eagle, right? That's the unexpected one. The unexpected, it's the same with the previous cartoon, right? The possible but unexpected reading leads to humor. Maybe, if it's a good joke. All right. So what happens at spell out to PF? Well, one thing that has to happen to make a syntactic tree ready for pronunciation, minimally, it has to be linearized, right? So I just showed you, and we know for many, many, many reasons that syntactic structures are hierarchical, but when you externalize them, they must be linearized. So the linearization is one thing that happens on the way to PF. Other things can happen too. I have this example here, impoverishment. This is something that I've been working on, but I don't think there's a need to discuss it here. Okay, what about list 2, the vocabulary? This is the list of exponents. Okay, and in distributed morphology, right from the very beginning, there's been this open question about roots. Are roots late inserted? But in distributed morphology, from the very beginning, there's been the argument that abstract morphemes are definitely late inserted. They have no exponents. So the exponents comes in the form of a list, and the list works the way that we expect. There's a more specified and elsewhere, right? So here on the left-hand side of the arrow, we have whatever features show you the target terminal for the exponents, right? So this is going to be for some kind of version of English be past tense, right? So it's some complex of T and B and tense and phi features, and the vocabulary, notice, can be underspecified. They don't include all of the features of the terminal for insertion, but only a subset. And then on the right-hand side of the arrow, you have the phonological features, whatever they are. I mean, I write them in IPA here with a slash. It doesn't matter exactly what this is, but this is the phonological exponents. So if you don't match this feature plus singular, you get the elsewhere by default word. And we have the subset principle for vocabulary insertion. So this goes back to Halley 97 at least. The exponent realizes a morpheme if it matches all or a subset of the grammatical features in that morpheme. And this is crucial. Insertion does not take place if the vocabulary contains features that aren't in the morpheme. So plus singular is a subset of these morphemes, so it can be inserted, right? But if this had a feature that isn't in this terminal, then it couldn't be inserted. Like, I don't know, if this had a feature plus masculine, then you couldn't insert it because there is no such feature in the terminal. And the maximal subset clause. So when you have several vocabulary items that match, you take the one that's the most specific. And I'm still dealing with abstract morphemes here. So why do this? Why have late insertion at all? What's the point of late insertion? Why don't we just think that morphemes have a pronunciation, and then you put them together, and you make syntax out of it? To me, the most compelling reason is allomorphy, good old allomorphy. The exponents of grammatical morphemes, we know, depends on their syntactic context. So just to take really simple examples that everybody knows. English plurals. So if you have the plural morpheme, and for lots and lots of words, it's going to come out as z. Z, s, z, right? So kid is kids, but child is not childs, but children. So the pronunciation of the plural morpheme depends on what lexical morpheme you've merged it with. And so you have a vocabulary that looks something like this, right? In the case of minus singular, the plural morpheme, insert en, just in case I'm on this list of roots, right? Just in case child is on this list, then otherwise I will insert the elsewhere z, s morpheme, right? The same thing is true of verbs. So, and I put dot, dot, dot here because there's a lot of other cases actually. I always find this fun in morphology class because the students go, oh, English plurals are so easy, it's just S. You ever studied German plurals? It's a nightmare. English, so easy. But I say, wait, what about child? What about foot? What about sheep? What about, what about fungus? I mean, this turns out to be quite a few of them. So again, what's the point? The point is, how do we want to say that the plural morpheme has a pronunciation before I put it together with the lexical morpheme if the pronunciation depends on which lexical morpheme I put it together with? Here's a case from verbs. It's exactly the same story, right? So if I have lots of verbs like talk, and I combine that lexical morpheme with past tense morpheme, then I get past tense pronounced as ed, ed, right? But if I combine it with see, I don't get seed, I get saw. If I combine it with buy, I don't get bide, I get bought. So what do you have here? You have the terminal, T plus past, so the past tense morpheme. It'll be pronounced as 0, just in case it's in this context. If there's a lexical verb that's on the list, and here's another list of lexical verbs, this will be the context for T, and elsewhere ed. And the point is the same. How could we say that ed, the morpheme for past tense, has a pronunciation prior to syntax if its pronunciation depends on what we put it together with in syntax? Now, that's obviously possible, and actually in distributed morphology literature this point is made repeatedly. This isn't the claim that it's impossible to make a system like that. You can, of course, in a pre-syntactic lexicon, you can mark these and you can say, okay, well, here's my en, and this is the one that you use if I get combined with child or ox, and here's my 0, and this is the one that I use if I get combined with C. But notice that's not a very parsimonious theory. That's not a very elegant theory because we have to do the same thing twice in the model. Before syntax, I have to tell you what you have to merge with in syntax, and then in syntax, I got to merge you with that thing. Whereas the model that I'm suggesting, where there's no lexicon in the sense that I already mentioned, in this model, we get rid of that problem. We say, it's only listed once, after syntax. After syntax, I'll know what I combined the plural morpheme with, and then I can figure out whether it's going to be en or 0 or s. Is the logic clear? I mean, is the argument clear? Okay, so that's the basic argument for late insertion on the PF side of abstract grammatical morphemes like tense or plural. What about roots? Again, these ideas are not my super fresh original ideas, and actually they go back quite a ways. I'm going back to Morant's 1996, and the more well-known paper 1997. The 96 paper is sort of circulating, but the 97 paper got published in a working paper, so you can get your hands on it more easily. Although you can get the 96 paper. The 96 paper, excuse me, the 96 paper is called Cat is a phrasal morpheme. Cat is a phrasal idiom. Cat is a phrasal idiom. And then most recently, Heidi Harley, 2014, wrote this really excellent detailed paper arguing for this view of roots. And went further than Morant's, in fact. Okay, so what are roots then? Roots are like blanks. They're like a blank piece of structure for syntax to work with. They have no features, just a numerical index. And the numerical index lets you look up the root on the vocabulary and the encyclopedia list. Crucially, roots don't have any category. So roots aren't nouns, they're not verbs, they're not adjectives, they have no category. They have no phonology. They're not pronounced cat or tortoise, they have no phonology. They have no semantics. They don't mean anything. They have no other grammatical features like gender or countability or whatever you want. So roots can't be pronounced, can't be interpreted, and they actually can't do anything in syntax until you merge them with something functional. And so Andrew Nevins makes this great joke that roots is like Schrodinger's cat, you know? The root is in the box, you don't know what it is. It's only when you open the box, you merge it with something, then you know what you're dealing with. Schrodinger's cat says, I wonder how you like it. Can you see there's a human in the box? There's a human in the box. Now, I get a lot of pushback on this idea. I'm sure that other root proponents get it too. It seems very radical, and it violates everybody's intuitions about the world. It's very hard to sort of let go of the idea that words mean something and that morphemes have a pronunciation, that words have a category. But there's a lot of evidence. There's actually tons and tons and tons of evidence that the pronunciation or meaning of roots depends on their syntactic context. So the argument for roots being afeatural, for roots having late insertion, the argument is going to be the same as the argument for grammatical morphemes. That is, we're going to show lots of cases where the meaning and pronunciation of a root depends on what it's been merged with in syntax. So first question, is there root suppletion? Since allomorphy and suppletion are arguments for late insertion of exponents of grammatical morphemes, is there evidence that the same holds for roots? Is there root suppletion? And yes, there is. Yes, there surely is. Okay, so in English we have this famous case of suppletion of the root go. So go when it is merged with past tense instead of goed, gets pronounced went. And actually, we know, diachronically speaking, we know that this is actually when plus past tense is pronounced T. This is the T of the, what is it, the week? The week? Is it week class? The regular old T from like buy, bought. But this suppletive root actually comes from an older English root that means go. And it's still stuck in the idiom to wend one's way. You know this expression? To wend your way is like to go maybe slightly wandering. Harley, so, and it's got to be said that some people, like Joe, would like to analyze go as not really a lexical morpheme, actually, that this is a purely grammatical morpheme, which I'm not sure about, but Heidi Harley definitely addressed that argument in her paper. She gives a big list of verbs cross-linguistically that are suppletive roots that are very hard to plausibly call grammatical. They look very lexical. Well, here's another example from English that, that I really like involving steal. So the root steal, if it's combined with the agentive derivational suffix er, and now I just wrote a little er here. Remember, this is late insertion, so this doesn't really exist. So this is just to remind us which little n this is. But suppose we merge the agentive little n derivational morpheme to the verb, the lexical verb, the root thief, the root steal, then the root is pronounced thief. So you can't say, hey, stop, stealer, right? Or you can't say, don't leave your backpack in the library. There are a lot of stealers, right? It's ungrammatical. And just remember that although this is blocking, it's not really blocking. In this model, there's no words that are like competing in some paradigm. Blocking just means the elsewhere condition. It just means there's something more specific, so you insert that before you insert the elsewhere. So this is a case of root suppletion. In syntactic context, and notice that you can get it back if you change the syntactic context. And this is what I find so amazing. When I spoke about this in my morphology class, I had a student who was a video gamer who said, hey, wait a second. And I'm not a video gamer myself, so you correct me if I'm misunderstanding something, but it seems that if you play multiplayer games, and you play those games where you have to shoot a bunch of zombies and stuff to get points, and somebody else comes and shoots your zombies and gets your points, that they're called a kill stealer. A kill stealer. Not a kill thief. This example is an idiom, actually. An idiom, steal your thunder. You know the idiom, to steal your thunder? This example comes from the show Friends, where I can't remember the exact circumstances, but one of the women she's getting married, and the other woman has the first kiss with Ross or something, and she says, hey, you're stealing my thunder. To steal someone's thunder means to steal their glory, to steal their credit, to steal their attention. So it says, you're a thunder stealer. You're a thunder stealer. Why can you get stealer here, even though it's blocked? Well, because this is a different morphosyntactic structure. What you're merging the ER morpheme with in this case is not steel, but thunder steel. So you're merging it to a different syntactic object. Right? Which means no problem. You can insert this one. What is this? A baseball example. This is even from Steven Pinker, right? So in baseball, there's such a thing as a pop fly. So fly has its past tense as flew, but here pop fly is like when you hit the ball and it pops high into the air. Instead of going out, it goes up. And it can be derived into a verb, to pop fly. The batter pop fly, not pop flew. So again, why? Because here there's a different structure, namely pop fly, not just fly. These are examples from Korean. Actually, it came up briefly in the talk, and actually, Korean is the first foreign language I ever learned, and it's the reason I became a linguist. So I really love these examples from Korean, and this paper is really wonderful. You should totally read it, Che and Harley. These are examples of root suppletion in Korean. And in Korean, there are some roots which have suppletive forms in the presence of the honorific morpheme. Korean has a morpheme which is an inflection on the verb. It's an inflectional suffix on a verb that indicates honorific agreement with the subject. If the subject is honored, is socially superior, then you get this morpheme on the verb. And there are certain verb roots, certain verb stems, which supplete in the presence of the honorific morpheme. So here we have chada, cha, which is to sleep. But if you want to say like grandfather sleeps, with honorific agreement, you get chumushida. Eat, 먹다. But if you want to say grandmother eats, then you say 잡수시다. 있다, this is the verb to exist. It's similar to the copula, but only with the meaning to exist. 있다. But if you have an honorific subject, then it's 계시다. Korean also has negative suppletion. So there are roots which supplete in the presence of the negative morpheme. So we have 알다, to know. But not know is 모르다. So you cannot form this synthetic negation of 알다. You can't say not 알다. You have to say 모르다. And the same for 있다. The same verb that suppletes in honorific also suppletes in the presence of negation. So again, you cannot synthetically say not exist. You have to say 없다. So you get a suppleted root there. Yes?
This whooshy at the end, is that a morpheme? Is that like do?
Sorry?
The honorifics. They seem to end in...
Yes, so actually they talk about this in their paper. This she is homophonous with the regular honorific morpheme. But they actually give an argument that in this case that this she is not actually that morpheme, but it's part of the stem, part of the root. That's because of the way things shake out in different auxiliary type construction, or, well, if you call it an auxiliary or a type of serial verb construction, but they give arguments for why that is. I think even whether you accept that argument or not, I think the point still holds, because whether you think that's the morpheme or not, you still get the suppletion of
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's completely.
But no, you're totally right to notice that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the who, do they say something about it?
The which?
The who. The thing preceding the she. There's.
Well, this would be the root.
Yeah, and there is no reason to suspect that the who, since it repeats in both of these cases, would be
well, I don't think so. This is because of also romanization, because this is mu and this is su. But it's a good question. They don't discuss that. I don't know that that's, but I can't say why. Okay, so this was PF, right? So first of all, I gave you some cases where grammatical morphemes form depends on another morpheme that they're syntactically merged with. Then I showed you, okay, look, there are roots whose form depends on being syntactically merged with another morpheme. So that was the PF side of things. What about the LF side? So if roots have not only no phonological features, they also don't have semantic features, so we should expect the same thing, and well, that seems to be what we find, right? So the truth conditional interpretation of roots depends on their morphosyntactic context. This is listed in the encyclopedia. The encyclopedia is a list of interpretation for roots in some context. In other words, just as there's allomorphy, there's something like allosemy. So here comes a bunch of examples. This example in 11, throw, this is from Harley, and Nevins also has this example. So let's take root number 795. These numbers are just totally made up. You know that. You know that, right? I just make these numbers up randomly, just so we don't forget that these are afeatural. So you have some root, and it can have the interpretation a light blanket. Now this interpretation, again, I put it in single quotes. You just have to imagine this in LF theoretic form, whatever you think that LF looks like. I'm very far from being a semanticist, so I don't even try. Whatever LF looks like, it's here inside the single quotes, yeah? So, right, so, forgive me. So, this root can be interpreted as a light blanket if it's in the context of a noun. So if I've merged this root with a little n, I go to LF, I look at the encyclopedia, I look it up on the list according to the index, and I see, okay, well, if it's merged with little n, it means a light blanket, a throw. Now, if I go and I see that it's in this context with a preposition, up, throw up, well, then it means vomit. And finally, and this might be the default, this is something that could be discussed, whether this should be treated as an elsewhere default or whether it's just listed like this with the verb. But finally, if it's merged with the verb categorizer, then it can be interpreted as launched by hand, right? Here's an example from German. I actually spoke about this with my friend who doesn't know anything about linguistics. Yeah?
Just a technical one.
Oh, please.
So do you take the up to be a part of the same verb?
Well, what do you mean part of the same verb?
The same head.
Part of the same head. I don't know. I don't have a position on that. It has to be local. I mean, it must be local enough. It has to be local enough, just like any context and a vocabulary entry in the same way has to be local enough. Again, not something I'm talking about in this presentation, but yes. I definitely take for granted that it's morphosyntactically local enough, and how that's implemented, I didn't think about that. This is an example from German. And just, I guess I should have said this already, but just let me remind you that the category heads are functional morphemes that get merged into the structures like all other morphemes, right? So, category heads. So, here's schwindlig. This is an example from German. Schwindlig, it's an adjective. You can actually see in the morphology that it's an adjective, right? So, that gets the interpretation dizzy. Now, if I take the same root and merge it with an N, I can get der Schwindel. I actually put the DP here just so we know we're talking about a noun. Der Schwindel. And that has two possible meanings. It can mean swindle. Swindle is like a kind of trick or fraud, right? And it can mean dizziness. You know, the noun of being dizzy. If you combine that root with the verb, then you get zu schwindeln, and that has the meaning to swindle, to trick somebody, to defraud somebody. Now this is the interesting one, die Schwindeligkeit. Now this is a derived adjective, derived from, a derived noun, derived from the adjective, right? So here I've taken the root and I've merged it with the adjective categorizer and then merged it with the noun categorizer instead of just attaching the noun categorizer directly to the root. Here I get die Schwindeligkeit, and this only has one possible meaning. It can only mean dizziness. It can't mean swindle. The swindle. So the meaning of a root depends on what category it's been merged with. Lovely Czech examples that my Czech students told me about, which I love. Ten detective. That's a borrowing, right? And it's masculine gender, and it means the investigator, right? And it could be a male or female investigator. If you take that root and combine it with the noun Ka, which is feminine gender, you get ta detektivka. And that means the detective genre. I suppose it could mean female investigator, but the point is, it means the detective genre, like of novels or films or something. Yeah. Here's another one, vyprostit, to extricate. To extricate. But if we combine that with a noun, vyprošťovák, we get hangover cure. Literally extricator, right? Hangover cure. Now, so I've shown you some cases where the meaning of the root depends on what it's been merged with in syntax. There are some roots that don't mean anything if you don't merge them with something in syntax. This is sort of the most extreme case. So, you know, we always used to call these cranberry morphemes. Cranberry morphemes because there's no cran. Cran only appears in a compound with berry, and actually there's another compound, cran apple, right? But there's no cran by itself. It's meaningless. Harley calls these caboodle items, because they don't have to be bound morphemes. The caboodle items, that's in 14 from the expression kit and caboodle. Kit and caboodle means every little last thing, every single thing. I packed my office kit and caboodle, down to the last thumbtack and rubber band. But notice caboodle doesn't mean anything by itself. It's only meaningful in this syntactic context. This one, reckless. Actually, there's a whole series of these. So we have something like care, and careful, which means having care, and careless, which means not having care. We have a word like reckless. Sitting at the pub, an American friend of mine said, haha, reckless. Isn't that weird? There's no wreck. I said, exactly. There's no wreck. There's no wreckful. Reckless means something like without caution, without responsibility. There's also another word, feckless. Have you ever heard feckless? Feckless, F-E-C-K. It means without having any responsibility. It's like, what is it? Like Eric Trump. Okay, that's like, this word is for someone like that. Feckless, having no responsibility. But there's no feck. So feck is meaningless without less. And it's actually meaningless if you merge it with something else like full. So, the logic is still the same, I hope you see. I tried to show you that the form of root morphemes, how they're pronounced, depends on what you merge them with in syntax. Here, the meaning of root morphemes depends on what you've merged them with in syntax. Look at idioms, or phrasal idioms to be more precise. At least since Marantz 97, we've known that the domain for interpretation of roots is syntactic. It's not limited to the, quote, word. And this domain is something like a little VP, that is, a phase. So what we don't find is phrasal idioms with agentive subjects part of the idiom. Notice, look guys, I bolded and underlined agentive. I asked Ray Jackendoff a question about this, and he said that Marantz was wrong, and then he gave an example as a counterexample that didn't have an agentive subject. The point is they have to be agents. There are idioms involving subjects, like the shit hit the fan. The shit is part of the idiom, and it's definitely a subject. But notice it's not an agent. This is a verb of motion. That ship has sailed. The ship is part of the idiom. It's the subject. It's not an agent. This is a verb of motion. So this is not an agentive subject. These are not counterexamples. And of course, there are many, many, many idioms that consist of a verb and its object. So, jump the shark. Do you know this one? Jump the shark is the moment or the scene or the episode in which a TV series becomes bad. Like, I don't know, Dexter jumped the shark in season 5, in my opinion. That's how you use that. Or take a shower. Take a shower means to shower. A verb and its direct object. So you notice that in these idioms, either both parts of the idiom or only one part of the idiom gets a special truth conditional interpretation in context. So the famous kick the bucket, meaning die, both parts of the idiom have a special interpretation. Kick doesn't mean kick in kick the bucket. The bucket doesn't mean the bucket. right? And just in case you wonder about this, if you think bucket doesn't mean life, consider the other idiom, bucket list. What's your bucket list? It's your life list, the things you want to do while you're alive. Or wallflower, this is a compound. Wall doesn't mean wall, flower doesn't mean flower. Wall means something like shy, flower is the person. Other ones, only one part has this special meaning and context. So if you consider take the stairs means the stairs. It means literally what it means, but take gets a special meaning and context. Something like climb or walk or use. Oh, and here's my bucket list, right? List means list. It doesn't get a special meaning, but bucket means obviously not bucket. It means life. Okay, why do you laugh? What's funny about this? It's funny exactly because we have forced the non-idiomatic meaning of take. Stairs still means stairs, but now we've taken the literal meaning of take, the non-idiomatic meaning of take, as in, I don't know, possess and remove. Again, it's the unexpected thing that makes you laugh. Humor really works like this a lot, right? Even if you just think of telling a joke, there's the setup. You tell the story, blah, 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 and everybody expects something. And then punchline, that's when the unexpected thing is revealed. That's why you laugh. Okay, so I know that I'm near the end of time, so I'm going to go through this quickly because I want to leave some time for discussion. This is just a summary, right? There's many examples of this in English and cross-linguistically, and I want to emphasize all of these examples are empirical evidence that shows we have to have some mechanism in the model for syntactic, context-dependent meaning and exponents. That has to be in the model. There's no getting out of it. I mean, I really could... and once you start noticing these things, they're everywhere, everywhere. All the time, everywhere. So we have to have some mechanism to do that. If we say that there is a pre-syntactic lexicon where meaning and form live, then that means we're going to have to do it twice in the model. We're going to have to do it once before syntax and once during syntax. I submit that this model I'm arguing for, this distributed morphology model, gets rid of that extra mechanism by simply saying, look, the meaning and pronunciation are after syntax. So I put together syntax, then I find out what it means and how to pronounce it. Okay, so just to finish off, I would like to say just really quickly something about, I think, a topic that hasn't really been discussed. So this isn't my original idea about the roots at all, but this is something I started noticing, and I'm not aware that many people have discussed it. What about variation? So how can it be that native speakers have the wrong meaning of a word? What does it mean for them to have the wrong meaning or a different meaning for the same word? And same for idioms. So here's some of my favorite cases. These actually come from Steven Pinker's book, The Sense of Style. Stephen Pinker, that's another author. We all just saw it, and then there were Stranger Things, so it's in the brain. Steven Pinker, the linguist, wrote a book where he basically tried to write a linguistically informed style guide, since style guides are woefully ignorant of basic linguistic and language facts and concepts. So he decided to write. And one of the things in the book, which was reported in the press as Harvard linguist tells you how to not misuse English, which of course they did. But he has this list of words. So he has things like disinterested. What does disinterested mean? Well, it's supposed to mean not invested, right? According to Steven Pinker and the language authorities, the prescriptivists, not invested. So like, for example, the judge in a lawsuit should be disinterested, not having a stake in the outcome. But many people use this word to mean not interested. I'm not interested. But how is that possible in our model? Another one, enormity. Enormity, what does this mean? It's supposed to mean great evil, like a terrible atrocity, something almost unfathomable. But many people use it to mean enormousness. And my favorite, beg the question. Beg the question. Well, it's supposed to mean assume the conclusion. That is circularity of logic. Question begging. But many people, as I'm sure you've heard, use it to mean raise the question. So here are some examples, just so you know I'm not lying about this. This is from the Hard Times. That's like the Onion for punk. And he says, I haven't enjoyed myself since '93, and I'm comfortable being the disinterested jerk people hardly tolerate, right? He's not going to have any fun at the show because he's disinterested. In other words, uninterested. Gary Neville quickly discovering the enormity of his task at struggling Valencia. The enormousness, it's a big task, that's all this means. It's not an evil task, right? It's not an atrocity. I just watched The Dark Knight Rises yesterday. This is from Batman Begins. Alfred Pennyworth says, strange injuries, a non-existent social life. These things beg the question as to what exactly does Bruce Wayne do with his time and his money? It raises the question. What does he do if he's not being Batman? What's the excuse for all these bruises? This is the meaning of beg the question as in circularity. Tried to assume the premise was already correct. Well, look, if we have a model like I've been talking about for the last hour or so, we get a very nice account of this. And it doesn't depend on any mysterious lexical black boxes at all. So disinterested can mean not invested, just in case in your encyclopedia you have an entry for the root interest in the special context of the prefix dis. So if I have interest in the context of dis, I'm going to interpret it as invested. But suppose I don't have that in my encyclopedia. Well, then I'm going to look at that and say, well, interest plus dis means not interested. Same thing for beg the question. So this can either be like kick the bucket, where both of the roots get a special interpretation, so that beg means assume in the context of question, and question means conclusion in the context of beg. But suppose I don't have this in my encyclopedia. Well, then I'll say, well, question means question, so beg gets a special meaning, and it must mean something like raise the question. And notice, it's always possible to update your encyclopedia. So if you didn't know that beg the question meant assume the conclusion before, and I tell you, you can update your encyclopedia. This is used for comedy. So this first three examples are from the show Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is a comedy created by, what's his name? I forgot. Saturday Night Live guy. Andy Samberg. And there's an episode where his character breaks up with his girlfriend and he's feeling sad. He says he needs a cathartic experience. Do you know what cathartic means? Cathartic, like to have an emotional release. And in the episode, they backform this into a verb, and they use it through the whole episode as a verb. And at the end, Andy Samberg says, I catharted so hard. Let's turn this debacle into a straight-up backle. You cannot be seen stopping by for any chits and or chats. Why is this funny? What is happening here? I submit that what happens here is that somebody takes the root and combines it with verb instead of adjective. When I say it, you say, that's not on my encyclopedia list. I don't have an entry on my encyclopedia for root number 642 and verb. Oh, but I get what you mean. Unexpected, therefore funny. There's a million more examples like this. In conclusion, I think that this is actually a very deep idea because it says that what makes language possible, what